Hey, how you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem, Daf 40 of Masechta Yevamos. Friends, Daf Mem, the first part of Daf Mem, we continue discussing the machlokas between Abba Shaul and the Rabbanon regarding Yibum nowadays, if maybe we should prefer Chalitza or if it doesn't matter. And then we get up to another Mishnah where we talk about Shimon or whoever does Yibum inheriting his brother. And then we get to Shnius Larayis. Fun stuff. Well, friends, let's start on Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis all the way at the bottom line. Ema Seifa, or I think we could say Reisha. Ema Reisha. We'll say the Reisha. Friends, what are we talking about? So yesterday we saw a machlokas between Abba Shaul and the Rabbanon, where Abba Shaul says that look, you can do Yibum if you're doing it for the right reasons. But if you're doing it because you're attracted to your sister-in-law, so it's better that you shouldn't do Yibum. Whereas the Rabbanon say, look, Yibum is you can do Yibum for whatever reason, right? Just Yibum is a mitzvah, you can do it. So now we have a kasha. The Gemara says, but Ema Reisha, what if we look at the first part of the brisa? Where we saw a brisa at the end of the daf yesterday, where we kind of explained it both according to Abba Shaul and according to the Chachamim. But what about if we look at the other part of the brisa? Matzos te'yochel b'makom kadosh. The pasuk says matzos te'yochel b'makom kadosh. If we look at that pasuk, what does the pasuk say? It says, "Banaseres mimenu yochla Aharon uvanav." So whatever's left over in the korban mincha, so Aharon and his children, i.e. the Kohanim, can eat it. Matzos te'yochel b'makom kadosh. They can eat matzahs in a holy place. B'chatzo amod yochlu. They can eat it in the courtyard of the Ohel Moed. Now, it didn't need to say matzos te'yochel b'makom kodesh. It already says that whatever's left over they can eat. And memele, it's matzah because the mincha was never chometz. So why do I need the pasuk to say matzos te'yochel b'makom kodesh that they eat matzahs in a holy place? So it says the brisa, mitzvah shebatchila hoyso olav b'chal heter. So here we have a mitzvah that was initially permitted, right? You have flour, regular flour. You can eat regular flour, nesra, but then you makdish it to be a mincha, to be a korban, so then you can't eat it. It's off limits. It's hektish. But then once the kohen takes the kometz and he puts whatever needs to go on the mizbeach, so then the kohanim can eat it. So it becomes permitted again. Is it possible that it goes back to its initial permissible state? And the Gemara is going to explain what that means. Mitzvah. Therefore it says, matzos will be eaten in a holy place, it's a mitzvah. So now, how do we understand this brisa? What does this mean? So b'shlomo the Rav, so I understand according to Rav, the Amar Amani Rabbanon, who said that this brisa is dafka according to the rabbis. So listen, Rabbanoni, right, who said that it's about just doing the mitzvah. Well then, this is how you explain this part of the brisa. Matzos te'achal b'makom kodesh mitzvah. That when we say that the matzahs are eaten in a holy place, that initially it was permitted, right? Initially this flour was permitted. It wasn't hektish or anything. If you want, eat the flour, make pizza, see what we care. If you want, don't eat the flour, let somebody else make pizza, see what we care. Nesra, in this case we're going to read the parentheses, even though we never do, but it seems like in this case we have to read it. Nesra, but now when you makdish the flour, it becomes asur. Chazav v'utra, but then after the kohen takes the fistful and puts it on the mizbeach, so then it becomes permitted once again for the kohanim to eat it. Is it possible that it goes back to its initial permitted state? Ratza ochla, ratza eno ochla. Is it possible, right? And if he wants to, he can eat it. If he wants to, he doesn't have to eat it. Ratza eno ochla. What do you mean if he doesn't have to eat it? The pasuk says that it says that it will be eaten those who have been atoned for it. Melami, that it teaches that the kohanim eat the korban mincha, and then the people, or the korbanis, and then the people get their atonement. So what do you mean? That meaning, when this flour, before it was made into a korban, so you can make pizza out of it. See what we care. make pizza, don't make pizza, make falafel, do whatever you want with it. Eat it, don't eat it, see what we care. So then you're makdish it to be a korban mincha, and then the kohen takes the fistful, puts it on his mizbeach, and now it becomes permitted to the kohanim to eat. So is it possible that they have that same choice of whether or not to eat it? What do you mean, whether or not to eat it? Of course they have to eat it. That's how the kapara happens. So, is it possible that now, at this point, once the fistful of flour has been put on the mizbeach, is it possible that if the kohen who offered the offering wants to eat it, if he wants, he can let his friend eat it? So therefore it says that these matzahs should be eaten in a holy place, i.e. that it's a mitzvah for the kohen to eat for the kohen who offered the korban mincha to eat the korban mincha. Fine, so I understand that according to the rabbis, right? According to the rabbis who say that when it comes to yibum, there's a mitzvah for Shimon to do yibum, so he does yibum. Over here, there's a mitzvah for the kohen to eat the leftover mincha, so he eats the leftover mincha. But according to Yitzchak bar Avdimi, who says that this brayso is abashol, what are the two different levels in the case of the mincha? Meaning, right, we explained, right, that in the context of yibum, so it could be, well, it depends. It depends what your intentions are. If your intentions are to do the mitzvah of yibum, so then great. If your intention is for some ulterior motive, well then don't do it, right? You have to have intention for the mitzvah. You have to have intention to do the mitzvah of yibum, but if you have some kind of ulterior motive, so then don't do it. So what is that ulterior motive when it comes to menachos? Right? When it comes to yibum, the ulterior motive is maybe you're attracted to your sister-in-law or something like that. But what's the ulterior motive when it comes to the mincha? Right? What are sort of the two different levels, the two different perspectives that you might have towards this mincha? Well, maybe you could say, well, it depends. Are you eating it because you have an appetite, or are you eating it achila gasa, too much eating? Achila gasa mishma achila, but eating, too much, overeating isn't actually called eating. After all, Rish Lakish says, that if a fellow overeats on Yom Kippur, so he's not in violation of, somebody who does not afflict himself, right? You have to afflict yourself on Yom Kippur. If you overeat, you're afflicting yourself, so you're actually not in violation of eating on Yom Kippur, or at least of violating the requirement to afflict oneself. No, so we can't say that it's talking about, well, maybe your perspective is for your appetite or to overeat. Overeating isn't actually considered eating. So maybe we'll say, well, it depends. Maybe you're planning to eat it matzah versus if you're planning to eat it chometz. But the pasuk says that you can't, that it's impossible for a korban mincha to be chametz. Rish Lakish says, you can't bake a mincha to be chametz at all. So therefore, right, you can't say that it's possible that the mincha is gonna be chametz. There is no mincha that's chametz. No, so rather we could say, well, it depends, right? Maybe you have to eat it matzah, or maybe you can eat it as like a boiled flour, right? If you boil it. So but then what's the deal with this boiled flour? If the boiled flour is matzah, well, he's just eating matzah, so who cares? And if it's not matzah, well, then it's going to be a problem because the dafka has to be matzah. And you can't, if it's not matzah, then you can't eat it. So what exactly are these two levels that you would be able to explain the mincha, that it could be in accordance with abashol? So le'olam emalach matzah, really I would say, look, boiled flour offering would be considered matzah nonetheless, but ulachitane bekra le'akev. And when the pasuk says, right, it says matzah tiachav makom kadosh, when the pasuk reiterates that you have to eat this as matzah, it's le'akev. It's to say that yes, even though technically speaking, this boiled flour is considered matzah, but in this particular case, we want you to use it. We want you to use actual matzah and not flour that was first boiled before it was baked. So you can explain that the brisa is actually could be in accordance with Abba Shaul as well, and it's saying that we specifically want you to eat the mincha as matzah, but not this process that was first boiled before baked, even though technically speaking it's considered matzah. Lahachi ella chalut matzah dikamuna l'mayilchasa. But then the Gemara says, well, if we're saying that this flour that was first boiled and then baked is considered matzah, but you can't actually do that for a korban mincha, well then what's the point of saying that it's matzah if at the end of the day you can't use it? So lo marsha adam yotze b'yedei chavasu b'pesach, to say, well, that you can use this flour that's been boiled and then baked for your matzah on Pesach. Afagav afapi dichalte meikare, and even though you first boiled it before baking it, came the hadar afi b'toner, since you then baked it afterwards, lechem oni karino be, we can call it the bread of affliction. Ve'adam yotze b'yedei chavasu b'paisach, and a fellow can use this matzah on Pesach. So we see that by a korban mincha, you'd have to use regular matzah, but on Pesach, technically you'd be able to use this matzah that was first boiled before it was baked. And therefore you can explain the brisa both according to the Rabbanan as well as according to Abba Shaul. And now we get to a Mishnah that discusses the inheritance of the brother who died. Snacholitz liyevimto. So if, so let's say you have, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, and Reuven dies, and what do we say? Acholitz liyevimto. So Reuven, of course, was married to Sarah, and now Shimon does chalitza with Sarah. He does chalitza with Sarah. Doesn't do yibum, he does chalitza. So acholitz liyevimto, so Shimon does chalitza. Right? So now, how do you divide up Reuven's inheritance? Right, Reuven's dead. What happens to his estate? So Shimon had done chalitza with Sarah. Now, if Shimon has done yibum, as we're going to see in a second, if Shimon had done yibum with Sarah, well, then he would inherit Reuven. But the Mishnah is saying that if Shimon does chalitza with Sarah, so he doesn't get Reuven's portion. Rather, he divides up with the rest of the brothers, with Shimon and Levi. They divide up equally Reuven's estate. So Acholitz liyevimto, Shimon does chalitza with Sarah. So then he inherits Reuven, like together with Levi and Yehuda lenachla regarding his estate. V'im yesh sham av nechasim shalav. Now, if their father is still alive, so if Reuven died when their father is still alive, so then forget about it. Right. It goes to the father. It doesn't go to the brothers. Reuven's estate goes to the father. Now, what if Shimon does yibum with Sarah? I'm sorry. What if Shimon does yibum with Sarah? So then Zach ben Chasim Shalachiv. So he inherits Reuven. Right. It's not that. Right. So at this point, right, if he did chalitza, we said that he divides up equally with Levi and Yehuda, but if he does yibum, so then he inherits Reuven. Abuda Omer says, Abuda bein kach uvein kach im yesham abn chasim shalav, that regardless of if Shimon does yibum or if he does chalitza, if the father is alive, the inheritance of Reuven goes to the father. It does not go to Shimon. Even if he did yibum, he does not inherit Reuven. The father inherits Reuven. Says the Gemara Pshita. The Gemara says, well, that's obvious. What's obvious? That if Shimon does chalitza with Sarah, i.e., that he doesn't do yibum with Sarah, so then he inherits Reuven together with Levi and Yehuda. So Sakadati Chamina, well, I may have thought to say chalitza b'makom yibum kaim. Well, I may have thought to say that chalitza is simply an alternative to yibum, i.e., just like if you do yibum, right? Just like if Shimon does yibum with Sarah, so then he inherits Reuven's estate. So also if he does chalitza with Sarah, he inherits Reuven's estate, right? As long, right? If he does yibum or chalitza, whoever steps up to the plate inherits Reuven's estate. V'nishkol kulu nichse. And therefore Shimon, even by doing chalitza, should be able to inherit all of Reuven's estate. Kamash Malan, Therefore, what it is saying is that no, he does not inherit the entire estate. Rather, he inherits together with Levi and Yehuda. They divided up equally. But one second, if that's the case to say, I may have thought to say, right? If it's the case that I may have thought to say that Shimon should inherit Reuven after doing chalitza, and then the Mishnah is saying, but that's not true. He does not inherit Reuven after doing chalitza. Rather, he just inherits like the other brothers together with Levi and Yehuda equally. When it says that he's just like the rest of the brothers, Eino ela ke'echad min ha'achim, which is say he's only like the rest of the brothers, right? I.e., meaning initially we thought that he should entirely inherit Reuven, and then we're saying no, he doesn't entirely inherit Reuven. Rather, he just inherits like the other brothers, right? So instead of saying harehu ke'echad min ha'achim, right, which is like I would have thought that he shouldn't get anything at all, but we say no, he does. He inherits. He's just like the other brothers, that he gets it as well, but it doesn't say that, right? But if it was saying like we thought that he should have gotten all of it, and we're saying no, he doesn't get all of it, he only gets like the rest of the brothers, so it should say Eino ella ke'echad min ha'achim. It should say he doesn't get everything, he's only like the rest of the brothers, but it doesn't say that. Rather, it says he is like the rest of the brothers, i.e., I would have thought that maybe he doesn't get anything at all. Right, so Elo Sakadati Chamina, I may have thought to say Hova Afsuda Miyubum Likanse Kumash Milan. No, so rather actually, I may have thought that actually we punish Shimon. I may have thought that since Shimon, instead of doing Yibum, he did Chalitza, and the whole point of Yibum is that we want to keep Reuven's name going, right? And Shimon decided he's not doing, what did I say? Right, the whole point of Yibum is to keep Reuven's name going, and Shimon decided that he's not doing Yibum, he's going to do Chalitza instead, and now Reuven's name cannot continue going, so maybe we should fine him, and he shouldn't get anything at all. So therefore the Mishnah is saying, no, he does. He's just like the rest of the brothers, he inherits together with Levi and Yehuda. The Mishnah had said in Yesham of, that if the father is alive, so then the father inherits Reuven. That the father has precedence to all of his children, right? So if Reuven dies and there's Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, but Yaakov, the father, is still alive, so Yaakov inherits Reuven, not the kids. We said that if Shimon does Yibum with Sarah, so then he inherits Reuven. So my time, because the pasuk says that he will be established on the name of his brother, and he did that, so he sort of gets his brother's estate. So Yehuda had said that if the father is alive, so whether Shimon did Yibum, whether Shimon did Chalitza, and I'm just saying Shimon, it could have been Levi or Yehuda either, but meaning I'm just using Shimon as one of the brothers. Shimon does Chalitza, whether Shimon does Yibum, whether Shimon does Chalitza, if the father is alive, the father inherits Reuven, and that is that Shimon doesn't get anything even if he did Yibum. Amula alacha Rabbi Yehuda, says Ula, the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. V'chein Amar Bitzchak Nafcha halacha Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Bitzchak Nafcha also says that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, that if the father is alive, he inherits Reuven, and that is that Shimon does not inherit Reuven even if he does Yibum. The Amar Ula, and says Ula, V'itema, right, and even after the father dies, the father was alive, he inherits Reuven, and that's that. V'amar Ula, it says Ula, V'itema Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, my time with Rabbi Yehuda. What's Rabbi Yehuda's rationale? The pasuk says V'aya b'chor sheteled ki b'chor, because we say in the context of Yibum that then there will be a firstborn yingel to Shimon, and it'll be on the name of the father, Reuven. So we compare the inheritance to a b'chor. Ma b'chor ein lo b'chayo of, afaynami ein lo b'chayo of. Just like a firstborn does not inherit anything while his father is alive, so here also Shimon is not going to inherit anything while his father is alive. Okay, the firstborn does not inherit anything while his father is alive, but once his father dies, so then the firstborn gets a double portion. So I would think here that once the father dies, then Shimon should get his portion plus Reuven's, and that doesn't seem to be the case. So midi Yakum Ashim Oviv Ksiv, Yakum Ashim Ochiv Ksiv, Velo Ashim Oviv. To which the Gemara answers, yes, but in the context of Yibum, it says that the Yingol that will be born will be established on the name of his brother, not the name of his father, right? And therefore, meaning if when the father, Yaakov, dies, Shimon is now getting the double portion, his and Reuven, but then he's inheriting his father from his father. But the point is that he inherits Reuven. So the point is, if Yaakov is alive, Shimon loses out on his opportunity to inherit Reuven. But if Yaakov is gestorben, so then Shimon inherits his brother, inherits Reuven. Ema, but now affect the Gemara, maybe I'll suggest, Heichadeleka Abdul Lishkol Nachla Tiskayim. Wait, what did I just say? Yeah, exactly. Ema, Heichadeleka Abdul Lishkol Nachla Tiskayim Mitzvasibim. Maybe I'll suggest that, okay, when Yaakov is not alive, and therefore Shimon, by doing Yibum with Sarah, is able to inherit, right, Yaakov al Shem Achib, he's able to inherit his brother Reuven. Maybe in that case, when Shimon is able to inherit Reuven, that is where there is Yibum. But where Yaakov is alive, the Lo Shakil Nachla, and therefore Shimon will not be inheriting Reuven, because it goes to Yaakov, Lo Tiskai Mitzvah Yibum, so we don't do Yibum at all in that case, because Shimon can't inherit Reuven. Only where Shimon can inherit Reuven is there Yibum. If Shimon's not going to inherit Reuven, then there is no Yibum. Midi Yibum Benachla Tala Rachmana. To which the Gemara says, well, whoever said, what makes you think that whether or not to do Yibum is dependent on whether or not you can inherit, Shimon inherits Reuven? Yabumi miyabme, do Yibum, v'ika nachla shakuli, v'lo lo shakil. No, Shimon, do Yibum with Sarah. If there's inheritance that you can chap, givaldig. If not, don't. But do Yibum. Either way, do Yibum. Yosef, Reb Chanina Kara, Kamed Yanai. Reb Chanina Kara was sitting before Reb Yanai Yosef V'Kamer, and he says, Halacha ki Reb Yehuda. That the halacha follows Reb Yehuda, that if the father is alive, then Shimon doesn't inherit at all. Omer le pok kari karich livra ein halacha ki Reb Yehuda. To which Reb Yanai says, hey, Basta, get out of here. The halacha, go read your verses outside. The halacha does not follow Reb Yehuda. Tani Tana Kamed Rav Nachman, a certain teacher of Braysos taught before Rav Nachman, ein halacha ki Reb Yehuda, that the halacha is not like Reb Yehuda. Omer le ele kiman ki Rabbanon. So Rav Nachman says, okay, fine. So if it's not like Reb Yehuda, then who's it like? The rabbis. Pshita, that's obvious that it's like the rabbis. Yochav Rab Malacha ki Rabbim. Of course, when you have machlokas between an individual and many, so the halacha follows the opinion of the many. So Amalei Asamye. To which this Tana said, you know what? If this Brisa seems to not make any sense, I'll simply delete it from my sort of collection of Brisas. To which Rav Nachman gives a pretty interesting answer. So Amalei Rav Nachman says to this Tana, he says, Lo, at halacha asnaich umukshahi da'akshelach ve'abchas l'ma da'abchas shapir abchas. Rav Nachman says to this teacher, he says, look, let me tell you something. You were actually taught a funny brisa. You were actually taught that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. But you said, how could it be that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda? Yochav v'Rab Malacha Krabim. So therefore you switched it around to say that the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda. But then what's the chiddush of the brisa? That the halacha doesn't follow Rabbi Yehuda. Of course the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda. It's going to follow the chacham. So therefore, Kilu, the brisa, you were taught a peculiar brisa. You were taught a brisa that says that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. And that didn't make any sense to you, because how could the halacha follow Rabbi Yehuda? Shouldn't we pass it to Rabbanon? So you flipped it around. But says Rav Nachman, the truth is that, yes, you were taught that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. It didn't make sense to you, so you flipped it around. And says Rav Nachman, you were right to flip it around, because the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda, and it's simply a peculiar brisa that doesn't really make sense. You were correct to flip it around, because halacha does not actually follow Rabbi Yehuda. So again, let's read that again. Tana Kamed Rav Nachman, there was a teacher of Braisos who taught before Rav Nachman, ein halacha Rabbi Yehuda, that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. And so Amalei Rav Nachman says to him, Ela Kaman Rabbanon. So okay, fine. So you're telling me that the Brisa says the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. So who's it like? The rabbis? Pshita, that would be obvious. Yochav Rab Malacha Krabim. When you have an individual and many, so the halacha follows the many. So Amalei Asami. So he says, you know what, if this, right, so the teacher says, look, if this brisa doesn't make sense, I'll just delete it from my sort of collection of brises. So Amalei, lo. Nachman says no. At halacha isnaich. Look, let me tell you something. The brisa that was taught to you was that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Umuksha hu ta'akshilach. But it didn't make any sense to you, because how could the halacha be like Rabbi Yehuda if the rabbis argue? Ve'apcha, so you flipped it around. And says Rav Nachman, even though, yes, the brisa was taught to you to say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, and you flipped it around to be not what you were taught, nonetheless, you were right to flip it around, because the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. Friends, now we get to another Mishnah, a new Mishnah, and this Mishnah talks back, you get back into like Arayis and Shnius Larayis and who could marry who. So, friends, I hope you're in the mood. It says the Mishnah, Cholitz Livimto. So, if Ruvain was married to Sarah, Ruvain dies, Shimon does Chalitza with Sarah. Shimon does Chalitza with Sarah. Who also bekrovoseh v'yasu bekrovov. So now he is not allowed to marry her relatives. She is not allowed to marry his relatives. Who also be'ima. He's not allowed to marry her mother. Uve'emima, her mother's mother. Uve'emavia, her father's mother. Uve'bita, her daughter. Uve'bas bita, her daughter's daughter. Uve'bas beno, her son's daughter. Uve'achosa, and also he can't marry her sister, Sarah's sister. As long as Sarah is alive, he cannot marry Sarah's sister. Ve'achin mutarin. But the brothers, right, the brothers would be permitted to these people. Shimon's brothers would be allowed. Shimon's brothers would not be allowed to marry Sarah, because she's Eishasah. No, because since they did, right, since there's no longer an opportunity to do Yibum anymore, right, because it says that once, right, Kevin Shelo Bana Shuv Lo Yivne, once already they gave up the opportunity, right, by Shimon doing Chalitza, so they gave up the opportunity to do Yibum, so now nobody else can marry Sarah, but the other relatives would be permitted to the other brothers. V'hi Asura Ba'aviv, she's not allowed to marry Shimon's father, Uva Avi Aviv, and Shimon's father's father, Uve Bno, Shimon's son, Uve Vem Bno, and Shimon's son's son, Be'achiv, Shimon's brother, Uve Ven Achiv, nephew. Mutter Adam Bekrovas Tsaras Chalutzasu, V'asu B'tsaras Krovas Chalutzasu. A person is permitted to marry the relative of the tsara of his chalutza, right? So let's say Ruvain was not just married to Sarah, but was also married to Rivka. Now, Sarah and Rivka are not related. So Ruvain was married to Sarah and to Rivka. Now, Shimon does chalitza with Sarah. So now, so Shimon did chalitza with Sarah, and so of course he would not be able to do to marry Rivka, who is Sarah's tzara, but he's permitted to marry Rivka's sister, right? Right? Mutar Adam Bekrovas, the relative of Tsaras Chalutzaso, the tzara of the one who he did chalitza with. So he did chalitza with Sarah. Her tzara, her co-wife is Rivka. Shimon would be permitted to Rivka's sister. Also b'tzaras Krovas Chalutzaso, but he's forbidden the tzara of the relative of his chalitza. So he did, so if Shimon does chalitza with Sarah, so now if Sarah's sister is married to some fellow and she has a co-wife over there, Shimon would not be allowed to marry the co-wife of Sarah's sister. Okay, so now frag the Gemara, Ibailu. So the Gemara wants to know, you want to know what the Gemara wants to know? Gazu shnius b'chalutza o lo. Heh. Fun stuff, right? Well, the Gemara wants to know, when it comes to chalutza, right? So we said Shimon does chalitza with Sarah, Givaldik. So we said now he's not allowed to marry her mother, or her mother's mother, right? Kilu. Apparently, when it comes to chalutza, there's also arayis. But what about shnius la arayis? So be'erva de arayis gazbu rabbanon shnius. So when it comes to mamish erva midoraisa, right? So for example, a fellow is married to a woman, so that woman's sister, it's mamish and isser erva deoraisa. So therefore we make all, or like that woman's mother, it's an erva deoraisa. So we make certain shniyas larayis because out of concern for our erva deoraisa. V'chalutza logazubu rabbanon shniyas. But maybe when it comes to chalutza, which, when it comes to like Sarah's sister and things like that, right? These arayis, when it comes to a chalutza, these relatives of a chalutza, to begin with, are only midrabanan. So maybe shniyas aren't really a thing. Or maybe it makes no difference. That just like by erva deoraisa we have shniyas, so also by erva derabanan, by, for example, the arayis, the relatives of chalutza, which is only midrabanan, nonetheless we still have shniyas there as well. Tashma, come in here, hu asur be'ima uve'em ima. So the Mishnah had said that Ruvain is not allowed, that Shimon is not allowed to marry Sarah's mother, grandmother. Ve'ilu aim ima lo katani. But it doesn't say anything about Sarah's mother's mother's mother, which would be a shniyas larayis, implying that shniyas larayis doesn't seem to be a thing. To which the Gemara says, well, maybe shniyas larayis is a thing, but dil mahainu time of the lo tani. Maybe this is why, right? Maybe Sarah's mother's mother's mother is a thing, but for the following reason it was left out. Mishum de kaboy lemisnei seifa, because the Mishnah continues and says, ve'achin mutarin, that the brothers are permitted to marry these relatives. Ve'itana aim ima, and if the Mishnah would have mentioned Sarah's mother's mother's mother, well then hava amina, I may have thought to say, ha'achin mutarin davka be'aim ima. I may have, if the Mishnah had mentioned that Shimon is also to Sarah's mother's mother's mother, so I may have thought to say that when the Mishnah then says that the brothers are permitted, I may have thought the brothers are davka permitted to Sarah's mother's mother's mother, but there's nonetheless not allowed to marry Sarah's mother and mother's mother. And therefore, the Mishnah left out Sarah's mother's mother's mother in order to make it clear that when the Mishnah says that the brothers are allowed to marry, to marry these relatives, it's even Sarah's mother and Sarah's mother's mother, right? So like Levi and Yehuda can marry Sarah's mother and her mother. V'lisni aim ima, but wait, why can't the Mishnah list Sarah's mother's mother's mother? V'lisni ha'achin mutarin b'chulon, and then just say that the brothers are allowed to marry all of them. The mother, the mother's mother, the mother's mother's mother, whoever they want. Kasha. The Gemara says, well, it's taka shtaka kasha. Alright, fine, very nice. So now we continue on our quest to decipher if shniyas larayis apply to chalitza. Says the Gemara, Tashma, come in here. He asur be'aviv uve'avi aviv. So it says in the Mishnah that Sarah, right, Shimon does chalitza with Sarah, and now we're saying that Sarah is not allowed to marry Shimon's father and Shimon's father's father. Katanimia avi aviv. So we're mentioning that Sarah is asura to Shimon's father's father. My lab mishum choletz. Davila kalas beno. That what's the issue with Shimon's father's father? Well, Sarah, the chol, right, in terms of chalitza with Shimon, right, she had a zika with Shimon, and then they did chalitza. So Yaakov, right, Shimon's father Yaakov would be usher to Sarah because it's his daughter-in-law. So that's a regular erva. But Yaakov's father being usher to Sarah, that would be a shniyas larayos, right? The daughter-in-law of his son. That's shniyas larayos. So we seem to be saying, so this seems to imply that there is shniyas larayos when it comes to chalutza. Lo, mishum misna. Davila kalas beno. No, rather, don't forget, Sarah was married to Reuven, was mamash married to Reuven. And when Sarah was married to Reuven, so then Yaakov was her father-in-law, and Yaakov was an erva, and because that was an erva to Oraise, so then Yaakov's father was also usher because of the daughter-in-law of his son, and therefore that is the right on account of the fact that Sarah was married to Reuven. That is why Shimon's father's father is also because she was married to Reuven, not because of the chalitza with Shimon. Tashma coming here, Uven bino. The Mishnah says that Sarah is not allowed to marry Shimon's son's son. My love, mishum cholitz. Mistam, it's because of chalitza, right? That Shimon did chalitza with Sarah, right? It's keilu they were married, and his son's son, Davila Eshes Avi Aviv. So, right, for Shimon's son's son, so who's Sarah? Sarah is the wife, right? He did chalitza with her, but is essentially the wife via chalitza, or after chalitza, or before chalitza, I guess, of this kid's father's father, right? So it's this kid's father's wife, which is Shnias La'arayis, in the context of chalitza. Lo mishum misna. No, it's because, after all, Sarah was married to Reuven, and she's therefore this kid's father's brother's wife. V'havila Eshes Achi Avi Aviv. It's his father's brother's wife. But one second, but Ameimar says that your father's brother's wife is taka okay. It's not an issue of Shnias La'arayis anyways. So Ameimar Mukila Bibar Brod Disovis. So Ameimar would explain that, yeah, what's it talking about? So yes, it's talking about Sarah in the context of Reuven, the fact that Sarah was married to Reuven, that's where we're talking about Shnias. But Ameimar would say that your father's brother's wife would be permitted, wouldn't be an issue of Shnias. But Ameimar would say that actually when it says son's son, it's talking about Shimon's father, Reuben and Shimon's father, Yaakov, right? If you look in the Mishnah, what does it say? It says Asur ba'aviv, uvaviv uvivno, right? So kilu his father, Yaakov, and his father's father, uvivno, and whose son? Yaakov's son. Uviven b'no, and Yaakov's grandson. So it's talking about Shimon's brother and Shimon's son, which that is why it is Asur. So it's not talking about Shimon's son's son. It's talking about Shimon's, Shimon's brother and Shimon's brother's son. So Yachi, if that's the case, Hainu Achiv uven Achiv. But if that's the case, then that's just his brother and his son. So Tana Achiv min ha'av v'katani Achiv min ha'em. So we're saying, yeah, but right now we're talking about Yaakov's son and Yaakov's son's son, whereas when the Mishnah mentions the brother and the brother's son, that's talking about from the mother. Alright, fine, sounds good to me. Says the Gemara Tashma, the Tani Reb Chia, the Reb Chia taught that when it comes to Chalutza, there are 4 arayos that would generally be Isur Erva Midoraisa, like for example if you're married, then these arayos would be Deoraisa, and there are 4 that would be Derabonon. Av, Uvno, his father, his son, Achiv, Uven Achiv, his brother, and his brother's son. Midivei Torah, those are Midoraisa. Avi, Aviv, his father's father. Vavi Imo, his father's mother. His mother's father, or his father's father, his mother's father. Ben Bino, his son's son. Uven Bito, and his daughter's son. Okay. Midivei Sofim, those would be Asur, Midivei Sofim, Shnias. Katanimia, Avi Aviv. So one second, so Reb Chia just taught that when it comes to Chalutza, there's father's father. My lab mishum cholitz. And Mistam we're talking about Shimon did Chalitza with Sarah, and now Sarah is also to Shimon's father's father. V'havila Kalas Bino. And it's Kalas Bino, it's the daughter-in-law of his son, right? Daughter-in-law of Shimon's grandfather's son, i.e. his father, and therefore his grandfather is also because of the daughter-in-law of his son, which is a Shnias La'arayis. Lo mishum misna davila kalas beno. No, rather the reason why Shimon's father's father is Asur is because actually Reuven was married to Sarah, and because Reuven was married to Sarah and they were mamish married, so therefore that is why the father's father is Asur. Tashma Avi Imo, his mother's father, my lav mishum choletz davila kalas bito. We say no mistama, that's because of Shimon the choletz. And we see that Shnias La'arayis by Chalitza, Lo Mishum Misna, Tavila Kalas Bito. No, it's because Sarah was married to Reuven, and that is why Shimon's mother's father was Aser, because of that, not because of Chalitza. Tashma, come in here. Uven Beno, and Shimon's son's son. My love, Mishum Cholet. Some we're talking about Shimon. The Havila Eshes Avi Aviv, and Sarah is his father's wife. Lo Mishum Misna. No, it's because of Reuven. The Havila Eshes Achi Avi Aviv. No, it's his father's brother's wife. But the Mimr says that your father's brother's wife is okay. So actually, a Meimar actually says that it is talking about Shimon, and it's his father's wife, which is a Shnius Larayis, and actually a Meimar holds that there is Shnius Larayis by Chalitza. Tashma coming here, Uveven Bito, and the son of his daughter. My lav mishum choletz davila eshes avi imo. So we're assuming that it's talking about Shimon and Sarah, and the issue is that it's this kid's father's wife, which is Shnius Larayis. Lo mishum misna. No, it's because of Reuven davila eshes achi avi imo, that it's this kid's father's brother's wife. V'ha gabishni is the erva lo gazu. But one second, but by Arayus we don't make a gzera by one's father's brother's wife. Rather, it must be talking about chalitza shmamina, gazu shni is b'chalutza shmamina. So we see that actually by chalitza there is shnius la'arayis. So now the Mishnah had said that a fellow is permitted to right. So Shimon, who does chalitza with Sarah, would be permitted to marry Sarah's co-wife Rivka's sister, but not Sarah's sister's co-wife. What do you want me to tell you? So now says the Gemara, Amr of Tuvi bar Kisno. Says of Tuvi bar Kisno. Amr Shmuel, in the name of Shmuel. Habal Sarah's chalutza. Somebody who, right. So if Shimon would sleep with Rivka, who is the tzara of Sarah, who we did chalitza with, Avlad Mamzer. So the child is a Mamzer. My time I'll come be Isura Kaima, because that's an Isser. What does that mean? Well, when Shimon does chalitza with Sarah, so then at that point, if he was to sleep with Sarah, it would be a lav. It wouldn't be an Isser, right? It wouldn't be an Isser of Eshes Och. It wouldn't be an Isser Kares. Rather, it would be a lav, right? That the pasuk says, "Kevin right shelo bana shuv lo yivne," right? It's a lav that if you're not going to do yibum with Sarah, so then you can't. Then you missed your chance. You can't be with her anymore. And if you do, so then you're over on a mitzvah slow saseh, but you're not chayiv kares. Now we're saying that does not apply, however, to Sarah's co-wife Rivka. Meaning, I may have thought to say that just like meaning. There was Sarah, there was Rivka, you had an opportunity to do Yibum with either one of them, and once you don't do Yibum, you do Chalitza, so then you missed your chance, and I would think I could argue that both by Sarah and by Rivka, if you were to sleep with either one of them, it would be a Lav, and the child would not be a Mamzer, because that's only by Chiv Kares, but, says Shmuel, that actually, if you were to have a baby with Rivka, the child would be a mamzer, because the lav of Kevin Shelo Bana Shuv Lo Yivne applies only to Sarah. It does not apply to Rivka, and Rivka would be Eshes Och, which is a Chiyuv Kares, and the child would be a mamzer. So says the Gemara, Amr of Tuvi bar Kisna Amr Shmuel, I'm reading that again, Habal Tsaras Chalutza, so if Shimon were to sleep with Rivka, Havlad Mamzer, the child would be a Mamzer, my time outcome be Isura Kaima, because it's actually an Isur Erva. It's not just the lav of Kevin Shelo Bana Shuv Lo Yivne. Amr of Yosef says, of Yosef Afanonami Tonina, we talk also have in our Mishnah actually supports that. Mutter Adam Bekrovas Tsaras Chalutzaso. Our Mishnah says that that Shimon would be permitted to marry Rivka's sister. Now, Yomert Bishlam Tzara Avroi. So I understand if you say that the issue, right, that we don't treat Rivka as a chalutza, rather we view her as an Isser Erva. So Mishumachi Mutar Ba'achosa. So he's usher to Rivka, but he's permitted to Rivka's sister. But if you say that Rivka is just like Sarah, i.e. that we treat her as a chalutza as well, amai mutter. So then why would Shimon be allowed to marry Rivka's sister? We said in our Mishnah that you're not allowed to marry achos chalutzaso. So we see that Rivka is an Isser Erva, it's not an Isser Chalutza. Leima Tavi Tufta de Rabbi Yochanan. Let's say this is a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. The Amr that Rabbi Yochanan says, Bein hu bein achin, whether Shimon, whether his brothers, Ein chayav lo ala Chalutza karis v'lo tzarasa karis. Would not be chayav karis for either Sarah or Rivka. So Rabbi Yochanan seems to be saying that Rivka would not be a chayav karis. It's a lav. So Amalek Rabbi Yochanan can say, look, no, the Mishnah our Mishnah that says that you're allowed to marry Rivka's sister does not necessarily imply that Rivka is a chiyuv karis. Rivka could also be treated like a chalutza. Amalek Rabbi Yochanan would say to you, V'tizbra achos chalutza deoraisa. What is the sister of a chalutza in any event in Isser deoraisa? Ve'amar Rish Lakish kan shana Rebbe achos grusha midavitor achos chalutza midavei sofrim. The Rebbe says that the sister of a of your divorced wife is also midoraisa, but the sister of a chalutza is also only midorabanan, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan can argue that look, both Sarah and Rivka are treated like a chalutza. However, we say that if Shimon did chalitza with Sarah, so then he's also to Sarah's sister, but Sarah's co-wife, Rivka's sister, that we're not going to say. So yeah, we'll treat Sarah and Rivka like chalutzas, right? Rivka won't necessarily be in Isser Karis. However, we don't extend the sister of chalutza thing to the tzara of the chalutza. Right? We don't say that the chalutza's tzara's sister is also, we're not going to extend it there. And therefore, that is why Rabbi Yochanan could argue, that is why the Mishnah says that Shimon would be allowed to marry Rivka's sister, but it doesn't necessarily imply that there's a chiyuv kares between Shimon and Rivka. Now, the Gemara says, how come the Mishnah says that Shimon's allowed to marry Rivka's sister, right? How come you're allowed to marry Rivka's sister, but you cannot marry Sarah's sister's co-wife? So answers the Gemara, well, it depends, right? When Shimon goes to do chalitza with Sarah, she's not bringing along Rivka. And therefore, nobody's gonna, see Sarah and Rivka together. Nobody's gonna think that he did chalitza with Rivka, and then now he's marrying her sister. And Rivka's not coming along, and therefore, nobody's gonna make that mistake, and he's allowed to marry Rivka's sister. However, Sarah may go along with her sister, and therefore people might think that actually you did chalitza with Sarah's sister and get confused. And then if you marry, and therefore we don't want you to marry Sarah's sister's co-wife, because you might get confused. People might get confused and think that it's actually Sarah's co-wife, which would be a problem. So that's why. Friends, that was daf mem. Yevamos. The first part of the daf, we kind of continued exploring the machlokas between Abba Shaul and the Rabbanon about sort of intention when it comes to Yibum, of if you have to make sure dafka to have the right intention, and if not, then don't do Yibum. And we then talked about inheritance, that when Shimon does chalitza, so then he doesn't inherit his brother, but if he does Yibum, then he does inherit his brother. We said that if the father is alive, then the father inherits the brother, inherits Ruvain, and says Rabbi Yehuda that if the father is alive, then Shimon doesn't inherit anything at all, even after the father dies. We then got to the Mishnah that we learned for the entire Memo Beis, which is about Shnias La'arayis, different arayis when it comes to a chalutza. And we're saying that even Shnias La'arayis apply to a chalutza. Friends, that was Daf Mem of Masechet Yevamos. Hope you enjoy. Peace out.